Archangel Michael is sending this warning for a reason, because someone from your past is still spiritually attached to your energy, and they know your sacred connection is getting closer. This karmic partner was never meant to walk into your next season with you, but they are fighting to keep access to your soul. That sudden exhaustion you've been feeling, the confusion, the strange dreams, the emotional heaviness right before moments of clarity, none of it is random. Michael says they can feel you pulling away, and it terrifies them. Because once you fully awaken to who your true twin flame is, their control ends forever. And here's the shocking part. The delays in your love life were not punishment. They were protection. Someone was trying to keep you emotionally trapped before destiny could activate. But tonight, the chains begin to break. There is a reason you found this message tonight. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. Because Archangel Michael says a spiritual battle has already begun around your sacred connection. And someone from your past is refusing to let go. This is not just about heartbreak anymore. This is about energy, destiny, divine timing. And the moment you understand what has truly been happening behind the scenes of your life, everything will begin to make sense. Michael is revealing that a karmic partner, someone emotionally attached to your soul through pain, control, trauma, or unfinished cycles, can feel your energy changing. They sense that you are getting closer to the love heaven actually intended for you. That is why strange things have been happening lately. Why you suddenly feel emotionally drained after moments of peace. Why certain people keep reappearing right when you start healing. Why memories you thought were gone suddenly return out of nowhere. Why your spirit feels exhausted even when your body has done nothing. This is not coincidence. A karmic attachment is fighting to survive. And Michael says the closer you get to your sacred connection, the more desperate that energy becomes. Some of you have been asking God for signs. You asked, why does every relationship collapse before it becomes stable? Why do I attract people who take from me emotionally? Why do I feel blocked every time I finally start moving forward? Michael says the answer is deeper than you realize. You were never meant to stay trapped in cycles that diminish your soul. But karmic partners often recognize spiritual light before the person carrying it does. That is why some people entered your life not to love you properly, but to feed from your energy, while delaying your awakening. And the painful part is many of you loved them sincerely. You gave second chances. You ignored red flags. You stayed longer than your spirit wanted to stay because your heart kept hoping things would change. But instead of peace, you found confusion. Instead of safety, you found emotional instability. Instead of clarity, you found yourself constantly questioning your worth. Michael says that confusion was never from God. Real divine connections do not leave your spirit in constant chaos. Yes, twin flame journeys are intense. Yes, spiritual love transforms you. But karmic bonds operate differently. They drain. They consume. They create addiction disguised as passion. And some of you are only now realizing that every time you tried to walk away, something pulled you back into the same emotional prison. Have you noticed that? Every time you begin healing, they return. Every time you gain confidence, they suddenly contact you. Every time you finally stop thinking about them, their energy somehow appears again through dreams, memories, songs, or unexpected messages. Michael says this happens because karmic partners fear replacement. Not replacement by another ordinary relationship. Replacement by destiny. Because once your sacred connection activates fully, the old cycle loses power forever. And that terrifies them. Some karmic partners consciously manipulate. Others do it unconsciously. But spiritually, the effect is still the same. They keep you emotionally occupied so you cannot recognize the door God is trying to open. That is why delays have surrounded your love life. Not because you are unworthy. Not because heaven forgot about you. But because your spirit has been in preparation for something deeper than ordinary romance. Many chosen ones misunderstand the season of isolation. They think, maybe I'm meant to be alone. Maybe love isn't for me. Maybe I missed my chance. No. Michael says isolation was protection. God had to separate you from people who only knew how to access you through pain. And for some of you, that separation felt brutal. You lost friendships. Relationships ended suddenly. People you trusted betrayed you. Family members misunderstood your transformation. You outgrew environments that once felt familiar, and the loneliness nearly broke you. There were nights when you cried silently because nobody understood what your spirit was carrying. You smiled in public while privately feeling exhausted. You questioned your purpose. You wondered why your heart kept attracting lessons instead of peace. Michael says heaven saw every tear. Every moment you almost gave up. Every night you begged God for clarity. Every time you asked, "Why is this happening to me?" But what if the collapse was not punishment? What if it was removal? Because sometimes God destroys emotional foundations that cannot enter your next season. And that is the part many people resist. Humans often cling to what is familiar, even when it is destroying them spiritually. Some of you knew the relationship was unhealthy long before it ended. Your intuition warned you. Your body felt it. Your soul felt heavy around them. But you stayed because the connection felt intense. Michael says intensity is not always alignment. Read that again carefully. Intensity is not always alignment. Karmic relationships often feel magnetic because they trigger unresolved wounds. They pull you into emotional highs and lows that create dependency. You confuse emotional chaos with depth because the connection feels impossible to escape. But divine love does not operate through fear. Your true sacred connection will not require you to abandon yourself just to keep someone close. And Michael needs you to hear this clearly tonight. The reason certain people had to leave your life is because your spirit is approaching a higher frequency. Some souls cannot follow you there. That is why the attacks increased recently. That sudden fatigue, the emotional confusion, the urge to revisit old relationships, the temptation to settle for less, the fear that your true person will never arrive. These are spiritual distractions designed to pull your attention backward. Because the enemy of destiny always attacks hardest right before breakthrough. And Michael says many of you are closer than you realize. Your twin flame connection is not dead. It is not lost. It is not forgotten by God. It is being protected. There are things happening behind the scenes that your physical eyes cannot yet see. Conversations unfolding. Awakenings happening. Spiritual cords breaking. Divine timing aligning. And meanwhile, karmic energies are panicking because their influence is weakening. That is why old cycles suddenly feel unbearable now. What once felt acceptable suddenly feels toxic. What once felt exciting now feels exhausting. What once kept you emotionally attached now feels spiritually heavy. This is the awakening phase. Your soul is beginning to reject what no longer matches your destiny. And Michael says something powerful is happening tonight as you hear these words. The chains are weakening. The confusion is lifting. Your discernment is returning. You are finally starting to see people for who they truly are instead of who you hoped they would become. That is spiritual maturity. And although this journey has been painful, it has not been meaningless. Every betrayal taught discernment. Every ending taught detachment. Every disappointment strengthened your spirit. Every delay prepared your heart for something real. Because your sacred connection requires a version of you that no longer accepts crumbs disguised as love. And maybe that is why this message found you now. Not earlier. Not years ago. But now. Because for the first time in a long time your soul is finally ready to release what was blocking your destiny. And Michael says when you stop feeding karmic cycles with your attention, heaven begins accelerating. Divine alignment. So tonight, do not fear what is falling apart. Some doors are closing because they were never meant to become your permanent home. And the people fighting hardest to keep access to your energy are often the very ones standing between you and the peace you have been praying for. But their hold is weakening. Your spirit knows it. Your intuition feels it. And deep down you already sense that your life is about to change forever. From the very beginning, you felt like you never truly belonged here. Even as a child, there was a strange awareness inside you that you could never fully explain. You noticed things other people ignored. You felt emotions deeply. You could walk into a room and instantly sense tension, sadness, jealousy, or hidden resentment without anyone saying a word. And because of that sensitivity, people often misunderstood you. Some called you too emotional. Others called you dramatic. Some even made you feel weak for caring too much. But Archangel Michael says your sensitivity was never weakness. It was spiritual perception. Chosen ones are rarely understood early in life because they are born carrying a different frequency. While others learn to survive by becoming numb, your soul came here to awaken. That is why your journey has felt so lonely. You tried to fit into environments that rejected your spirit. You tried to stay in relationships that slowly drained your light. You tried to explain your heart to people who only understood surface-level emotions. And after a while, you stopped speaking about what you truly felt because nobody seemed to understand the depth of your inner world. Some of you learned to suffer silently. You became the strong one, the listener, the healer, the dependable person everyone leaned on. But who was there for you? Michael says many chosen ones were conditioned to give love without receiving the same depth in return. You became emotionally available for everyone else while privately feeling empty yourself. And the painful truth is people often admired your light while secretly benefiting from your exhaustion. Think about your past relationships carefully. How many times did you carry the emotional weight alone? How many times did you apologize just to keep peace? How many times did you ignore your intuition because you were afraid of losing someone? You kept hoping people would eventually love you the way you loved them. But instead, you found yourself trapped in cycles of emotional inconsistency. One day they wanted you. The next day they pulled away. One moment they made promises. The next moment they treated you like an option. And because your soul craved genuine connection, you tolerated behavior that slowly damaged your spirit. Michael says this is one of the deepest wounds chosen ones carry, confusing emotional suffering with spiritual loyalty. You thought enduring pain proved the connection was real. But real love does not require self-abandonment. Some of you were raised in environments where love felt conditional from the beginning. You had to earn affection. You had to suppress your true emotions just to avoid conflict. You learned early that expressing your needs often led to rejection or criticism. So later in life, when karmic partners entered your path, the pattern felt familiar. Not healthy. Familiar. And familiarity can be dangerous when trauma disguises itself as destiny. That is why some of you stayed connected to people who repeatedly hurt you. Not because you were foolish, but because your nervous system had normalized instability. Michael says the enemy often uses familiar pain to delay divine alignment. Because if you remain emotionally attached to what wounds you, you become too distracted to recognize what heals you. And many of you have been distracted for years. Distracted by toxic cycles. Distracted by people who only contacted you when they needed validation. Distracted by relationships that kept your spirit in survival mode instead of peace. Meanwhile, your sacred connection remained delayed in the background. Not denied. Delayed. There is a difference. Some of you thought God abandoned your love story, especially after the betrayals, especially after giving your whole heart to someone who broke your trust. You asked, why would God allow this? Why do I always attract painful relationships? Why does love feel so difficult for me? Michael says because your soul was never meant for ordinary connection. You are not here for shallow love. You are not here for temporary attachment. You are not here to build your life around emotional games. Your spirit has always been searching for something deeper, a connection that recognizes your soul. Not just your appearance, your usefulness, or your ability to give endlessly. But before divine love could enter, the false patterns had to be exposed. That exposure hurt. Some of you lost years trying to save people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You gave loyalty to people who only valued convenience. You gave honesty to people who manipulated truth. You gave softness to people who weaponized your compassion. And eventually, your soul became tired. Not just emotionally tired, spiritually tired. You reached a point where you started questioning yourself. Maybe I ask for too much. Maybe I'm impossible to love. Maybe relationships are supposed to hurt. But Michael says, listen carefully. You were not asking for too much. You were asking the wrong people. And that realization changes everything. Because the moment you stop blaming yourself for being deeply loving, you begin seeing who truly deserved access to your energy and who never did. Some of you are only now realizing how much you abandoned yourself to keep others comfortable. You tolerated disrespect because you feared abandonment. You accepted inconsistency because you feared loneliness. You ignored your intuition because you feared starting over. Yet every compromise moved you further away from inner peace. Michael says heaven watched every moment. Every fake apology you accepted. Every sleepless night you spent overthinking. Every time you cried in silence after pretending you were okay. And still, despite everything, your spirit survived. That is important. Because many people would have become cold after enduring what you endured. But somehow, beneath the heartbreak, your soul still carries hope. That hope is sacred. It is evidence that God never abandoned your spirit, even during your darkest seasons. Some of you have felt isolated not only romantically, but socially and spiritually too. Friends disappeared when you started evolving. Family members mocked your transformation. People became uncomfortable when you stopped tolerating toxic behavior. And suddenly, the version of you that once kept everyone comfortable began disappearing. That transition can feel terrifying, because healing changes your relationships. The healed version of you no longer negotiates your worth just to avoid rejection. And that shift threatens people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Michael says this is why some individuals became distant the moment you started reclaiming your power. Not because you became difficult, because you became unavailable for manipulation. There is a difference. The old version of you accepted crumbs. The awakening version of you recognizes divine value. And that awakening changes everything around you. Some of you noticed that once you started healing, certain people suddenly tried harder to return into your life. Why? Because your energy became valuable again. Karmic partners often pull away when they think you will always remain emotionally available. But the moment they sense you are truly detaching, panic begins. Suddenly they text. Suddenly they apologize. Suddenly they remember your worth. But Michael warns that not every return is reconciliation. Sometimes it is resistance. Resistance against your evolution. Resistance against your healing. Resistance against the sacred connection approaching your life. And this is where discernment becomes critical. Because loneliness can tempt you to reopen doors God already closed. Some of you have been standing between two timelines without realizing it. One timeline keeps repeating pain because it feels familiar. The other requires faith because it is unknown. And spiritually, you are being asked to choose. Choose your healing. Choose your peace. Choose the version of yourself that no longer survives on emotional breadcrumbs. Michael says your sacred connection cannot fully enter while you are emotionally chained to cycles that diminish your spirit. That is why the universe has been forcing endings. Not to punish you, to free you. And yes, freedom can feel lonely at first, especially when you spent years attaching your worth to being chosen by others. But there comes a moment in every chosen one's journey where they realize something powerful. Being rejected by the wrong people was divine protection. Let that sink in deeply. Some relationships ended because heaven saw what you refused to see. Some betrayals exposed truths your emotions tried to ignore. Some delays prevented you from building a permanent future inside a temporary lesson. Michael says your life is entering a season where clarity will replace confusion. You will stop romanticizing people who only gave you inconsistency. You will stop chasing validation from emotionally unavailable souls. You will stop mistaking karmic attachment for sacred love. And when that happens, your energy changes completely. Because the healed version of you no longer begs for connection. You attract it naturally. Your spirit becomes calmer. Your discernment sharpens. Your intuition strengthens. And suddenly, what once felt irresistible no longer has power over you. That is not coincidence. That is liberation. The karmic cycle weakens the moment you finally recognize your own value. And Michael says many of you are standing at that exact threshold now. The old chapter is collapsing. Not because you failed, but because your soul has finally outgrown the pain it once mistook for love. What if the greatest heartbreaks of your life were never meant to destroy you? What if every painful ending, every betrayal, every delay, every season of isolation, was actually clearing the path for the love your soul was always destined to experience? Archangel Michael says many chosen ones misunderstand what is happening during the separation phase, before a sacred connection arrives. They think life is falling apart, but spiritually, life is being rearranged. And there is a difference between destruction and divine reconstruction. Because sometimes God removes people, environments, habits, and emotional attachments not to punish you, but because they cannot follow you into the next chapter of your destiny. That is why your life may have felt unstable recently. Things you once depended on began collapsing. People you trusted suddenly disappeared. Plans failed unexpectedly. Relationships became confusing. Your emotions intensified. Your intuition grew louder. At first, it felt like chaos. But Michael says chaos often happens right before spiritual alignment. Think about a storm for a moment. From the outside, storms look violent, disruptive, uncomfortable. But storms also clear dead energy from the atmosphere. And spiritually, many of you have been living through an internal storm designed to remove everything blocking your sacred connection. The painful truth is this. If certain karmic relationships had continued, they would have completely disconnected you from your higher path. Some of you were slowly abandoning your own identity, trying to maintain relationships that were never aligned with your soul. You became smaller to keep others comfortable. You silenced your intuition to avoid conflict. You tolerated emotional instability because you feared being alone. But heaven could see where those paths were leading. And Michael says divine intervention often looks painful before it looks purposeful. That unexpected breakup? Intervention. That friendship ending? Intervention. That painful separation that forced you to confront yourself? Intervention. At the time, you thought you were losing everything. But now your spirit is beginning to realize something deeper. You are being redirected. Many chosen ones think their twin flame journey begins the moment they physically meet their sacred counterpart. But Michael says the journey actually begins long before that. It begins the moment your soul starts awakening from false love. The moment you stop confusing attachment with alignment. The moment you stop begging for crumbs. The moment you finally recognize your worth beyond who chooses you. That is the beginning of divine preparation. Because your sacred connection requires emotional maturity, spiritual discernment, and inner healing. Without those lessons, you would repeat karmic patterns even inside divine love. And that is why the delays were necessary. Not to deny you love, to prepare you for it. Some of you became angry at God during the waiting season. You watched other people enter relationships while your own love life felt blocked. You questioned why everyone else seemed to receive companionship while you carried loneliness. Meanwhile, nobody saw the deeper transformation happening inside you. Nobody saw the nights you spent healing childhood wounds. Nobody saw the moments you finally broke toxic emotional cycles. Nobody saw how hard you fought to rebuild your self-worth after betrayal. But heaven saw it. Every lesson mattered. Because your twin flame is not entering your life merely to create romance. This connection activates purpose. And that is why karmic partners fought so hard to keep you distracted. A sacred connection changes everything. It changes how you see yourself, how you love, how you heal, how you walk through the world spiritually. That level of transformation threatens every false structure built around fear. Michael says some of you can already feel your sacred connection approaching, even if you have not met them physically yet. You sense it in your spirit. There is an unexplainable feeling that your life is approaching a turning point. Certain old desires no longer excite you. Surface-level connections feel empty now. Your soul craves depth, honesty, emotional safety, and spiritual truth. That shift is not random. It is preparation. And here is something many people do not understand about twin flame energy. Before reunion comes purification. Everything unhealed rises to the surface first. That is why recent months may have felt emotionally overwhelming. Old memories resurfaced. Unresolved pain returned. Patterns you thought you healed suddenly reappeared. You wondered, why am I feeling all of this again? Because your soul is clearing emotional residue before alignment. Michael says heaven will not build sacred union on unstable foundations. So the healing became unavoidable. Some of you resisted this process at first. You tried distracting yourself. You tried forcing old relationships to work. You tried convincing yourself that settling was enough. But your spirit would not allow it anymore. Have you noticed that? What once satisfied you emotionally now feels empty. What once distracted you now feels exhausting. What once felt addictive now feels spiritually heavy. That is because your frequency is changing. And as your frequency rises, karmic connections become harder to tolerate. You begin seeing manipulation clearly. You recognize inconsistency faster. Your intuition warns you sooner. Most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself for temporary affection. That is one of the greatest signs spiritual alignment is approaching. Michael says many chosen ones mistake loneliness for failure during this phase. But solitude is often where sacred transformation happens. Because isolation removes noise. It removes external influence long enough for you to finally hear your own soul clearly. And some of you had never truly heard yourselves before. You spent years prioritizing other people's emotions over your own truth. You became experts at understanding everyone else while remaining disconnected from your own needs. Now heaven is restoring that connection. Slowly, painfully, powerfully. And through this restoration, something incredible begins happening. You stop chasing, not because you no longer desire love, but because desperation leaves your spirit. You no longer feel the need to force connections. You no longer beg for clarity from emotionally unavailable people. You no longer confuse silence with mystery or inconsistency with passion. Instead, you begin embodying peace. And Michael says peace is the doorway your sacred connection recognizes. Because your true twin flame does not arrive to continue your suffering. They arrive after your soul learns discernment. This is why karmic cycles are collapsing now. The old version of you tolerated emotional confusion. The awakened version of you recognizes energetic truth. That shift changes who can access you spiritually. Some people who once had emotional control over you suddenly feel distant now. Conversations feel forced. Attachments weaken. Your emotional dependency begins disappearing. And for the first time in a long time you are starting to feel free. That freedom may feel unfamiliar at first. Many chosen ones become so accustomed to emotional chaos that peace initially feels empty. But Michael says do not mistake calmness for lack of connection. Real divine love feels safe. Not because it lacks intensity, but because it lacks manipulation. And perhaps the greatest revelation of all is this. Your twin flame was never the lesson. The karmic relationships were. Read that again carefully. The people who hurt you were not proof that love is impossible. They were contrast. They revealed what your soul could no longer accept. Without those experiences, you might never have developed the discernment required to recognize authentic spiritual connection. Every betrayal sharpened your intuition. Every disappointment strengthened your boundaries. Every painful ending redirected your path toward alignment. Nothing was wasted. Even your tears carried purpose. Michael says some of you are approaching the end of a major karmic cycle right now. That is why emotions feel intense. That is why old people suddenly reappear. That is why your spirit feels both exhausted and awakened at the same time. A timeline is collapsing, and another one is opening. The version of you who begged for unstable love is disappearing. In their place rises someone stronger, clearer, spiritually awakened. Someone who finally understands that divine love does not require self-sacrifice to be maintained. And as this transformation continues, your sacred connection draws closer. Not because you chased it, but because you finally became emotionally available for what heaven intended all along. So if your life has felt uncertain recently, if relationships have been falling away, if old emotional cycles are breaking apart, do not panic. Michael says this is not the end of your story. This is the preparation phase before destiny fully activates. And the love meant for your soul is no longer being delayed. It is being aligned. There is a spiritual reason your journey has felt heavier than other people's. Archangel Michael says many chosen ones spend years blaming themselves for battles that were never entirely physical to begin with. You thought you were simply unlucky in love. You thought you kept meeting the wrong people by accident. You thought your delays meant something was wrong with you. But what if the resistance around your life was actually connected to the magnitude of your destiny? Because the truth is not every battle is visible. Some wars happen emotionally. Some happen mentally. Some happen energetically. And the closer a soul gets to divine alignment, the more spiritual interference often tries to create confusion, distraction, fear, and emotional exhaustion. That is why your path has felt so intense. Michael says there are people watching this message right now who have spent years fighting invisible heaviness without understanding where it came from. You felt blocked even when you were trying your best. You lost motivation suddenly for no clear reason. You experienced emotional crashes after moments of hope. You kept attracting relationships that mirrored your deepest wounds instead of your deepest desires. And over time, you began questioning yourself. Why does everything become difficult right before it improves? Why do people betray me when I genuinely care about them? Why do I feel spiritually attacked every time I begin healing? Michael says because there has been a battle around your connection long before you realized it existed. Not because you are cursed. Not because God abandoned you. But because sacred connections disrupt karmic systems. Read that carefully. A true twin flame connection is not just romance. It is awakening. An awakening threatens every false structure built on fear, control, manipulation, dependency, and emotional unconsciousness. That is why karmic partners often become more aggressive the moment they sense you evolving. Spiritually. Some return physically. Others try to reconnect emotionally. Others linger energetically through memories, guilt, emotional triggers, or unresolved attachments. And suddenly, just when you start finding peace, chaos returns. Have you noticed that pattern? The moment you detach emotionally, they suddenly reappear. The moment you focus on yourself, distractions increase. The moment you feel spiritually stronger, old temptations return. Michael says this is not random. Karmic energy feeds on emotional attachment. As long as you remain emotionally entangled in old pain, your energy stays divided. Your focus weakens. Your intuition becomes clouded. And spiritually, it becomes harder for divine alignment to fully enter your life. That is why cord-cutting seasons feel so painful. Because you are not only releasing a person, you are releasing a version of yourself that survived through emotional survival patterns. And for many chosen ones, survival became identity. You became hyper-aware of other people's moods. You learned to over-explain yourself to avoid rejection. You became addicted to fixing problems, calming conflict, and earning affection. But Michael says sacred love cannot fully arrive while you are still operating from wounded survival instincts. That is why the spiritual battle intensified. Not to destroy you, to awaken you. Some of you thought the hardest part of this journey was losing people. But Michael says the hardest part was seeing the truth. seeing who truly loved you, seeing who only loved your availability, seeing who became uncomfortable once you stopped abandoning yourself. Truth changes everything, and once spiritual discernment activates, you cannot unsee what your soul has recognized. That is why some relationships suddenly feel unbearable now. Conversations that once felt normal now drain your energy. Situations you once tolerated now disturb your peace. People you once chased now feel emotionally heavy. Your spirit is rejecting lower alignment. And this is where many chosen ones become confused. Because healing initially feels lonely. When toxic cycles disappear, silence enters first. No chaos. No emotional games. No constant uncertainty. Just stillness. And many people mistake stillness for emptiness because they became conditioned to emotional turbulence. Michael says karmic bonds train people to associate anxiety with love. Waiting for texts. Overanalyzing behavior. Feeling emotionally unstable. Constantly trying to earn reassurance. But divine connection operates differently. It does not require emotional suffering to sustain itself. And that truth threatens every karmic attachment still connected to your energy. Some karmic partners can feel spiritually when your detachment becomes real. That is why they suddenly become more attentive once you stop chasing. Why they contact you after long silence. Why they suddenly change once they sense your energy withdrawing. But Michael warns, not every emotional return is genuine transformation. Sometimes it is fear of losing access. Because people who benefited from your emotional openness often panic once your boundaries strengthen. And spiritually, your boundaries have been strengthening rapidly. You may not fully realize it yet, but your soul has already begun disconnecting from cycles that once controlled you. That is why certain distractions no longer satisfy you. That is why your intuition has become louder recently. That is why your spirit feels restless whenever you try settling for less than what your soul truly desires. You are evolving beyond karmic frequency, and that evolution creates spiritual tension. Some of you have experienced strange emotional symptoms recently. Sudden exhaustion, intense dreams, random memories resurfacing, feeling emotionally heavy without explanation, unexpected urges to revisit old relationships. Michael says these are signs of energetic clearing. Your soul is processing unresolved emotional residue before full alignment. Because divine union requires emotional clarity. Not perfection. Clarity. And clarity is exactly what karmic cycles fear most. Why? Because clarity breaks emotional addiction. The moment you clearly see manipulation, it loses power. The moment you clearly see inconsistency, you stop romanticizing it. The moment you clearly see your worth, you stop begging for love that dishonors your spirit. That is liberation. And liberation terrifies systems built around your emotional dependency. Michael says many of you underestimated how powerful your energy truly is. Your compassion heals people. Your presence impacts environments. Your intuition sees beneath surfaces. Your spirit naturally awakens others. That is why your life has never felt normal. You were not designed for shallow existence. But because of that spiritual sensitivity, you also absorbed pain deeply. You carried emotions that were not yours. You remained loyal to people long after your intuition warned you to leave. And over time, your spirit became exhausted from carrying what heaven never intended for you to carry. Now that burden is being removed. Painfully. Gradually. Divinely. Some endings had to happen because your soul was suffocating beneath karmic weight. Michael says many chosen ones stayed in old cycles because they feared hurting others. But in the process, they kept hurting themselves. And eventually, the universe intervenes. Not always gently. Sometimes through sudden separation. Sometimes through betrayal. Sometimes through collapse. Because when a soul ignores intuition long enough, life begins forcing transformation externally. That is what many of you experienced. You called it heartbreak. Heaven called it redirection. And although it wounded you deeply, something important happened afterward. You awakened. Not immediately. Not overnight. But slowly, your spirit started remembering who you truly are beyond pain. You started valuing peace differently. You stopped romanticizing suffering. You became more protective of your energy. And now, karmic attachments are weakening because your consciousness is changing. That is why old cycles feel harder to return to. You physically can no longer pretend certain behavior is acceptable. Your soul reacts instantly now. Your discernment activates quickly. That is spiritual growth. Michael says your sacred connection is being protected during this season in ways you cannot fully see yet. Certain delays happened because timing mattered. Certain separations happened because healing mattered. Certain doors closed because your future required it. And although you once saw these experiences as abandonment, one day you will recognize them as divine intervention. Because imagine if you had received your twin flame connection while still emotionally trapped inside karmic dependency. You would have sabotaged your own alignment from unresolved wounds. So heaven slowed things down intentionally, not to deny your blessing, to preserve it. And now something major is shifting. The emotional fog is lifting. The karmic distractions are weakening. Your intuition is becoming sharper than ever before. You are beginning to recognize the difference between attention and genuine love, between chemistry and alignment, between emotional addiction and sacred connection. That discernment changes your entire future. Because once your spirit truly awakens, karmic cycles can no longer control you the same way. And Michael says many of you are standing at the edge of complete energetic transformation now. The battle around your connection is reaching its final stages. Not because darkness suddenly disappeared, but because your soul is finally becoming stronger than the illusions that once kept you trapped. And the moment illusion loses power, destiny moves closer. There were moments when you truly thought you would never recover. Archangel Michael says many chosen ones carry invisible scars that nobody around them fully understands. People saw your smile, your strength, your ability to keep moving forward, but they never saw the battles happening quietly inside your soul. They never saw the nights you cried yourself to sleep asking God why your heart kept experiencing loss. They never saw the emotional exhaustion that came from constantly loving people who could not love you at the same depth. They never saw how many times you almost gave up on the idea of real connection entirely. Because after enough disappointment, something inside a person begins to shut down. Not all at once. Slowly. Quietly. You stop expecting consistency. You stop trusting words. You stop believing people will stay. And eventually, survival replaces hope. Michael says many of you entered a season where your spirit became emotionally numb, not because you lacked love, but because you had experienced too much pain without enough safety. You were tired of rebuilding yourself after every betrayal. Tired of pretending certain wounds did not affect you. Tired of carrying emotional burdens alone while everyone assumed you were strong enough to handle everything. But strength can become exhausting when nobody asks how much pain it took to become that strong. Some of you became so accustomed to disappointment that you started expecting abandonment before relationships even had the chance to grow. You prepared yourself emotionally for people leaving. You overanalyzed changes in energy. You feared becoming too much for others. And secretly, you carried a deep question inside your heart. Why does love always hurt me? Michael says that question did not come from weakness. It came from accumulated heartbreak. Because many chosen ones were repeatedly placed in situations where they gave genuine love to emotionally unavailable people. You poured energy into relationships hoping your loyalty would eventually create stability. But instead, you kept encountering inconsistency. One person made you feel chosen one day and invisible the next. Another promised commitment while entertaining other options behind your back. Another only returned when they felt lonely, wounded, or afraid of losing access to your energy. And every experience left another scar. Over time, your spirit became cautious. You stopped expressing emotions freely. You stopped trusting your intuition because people kept convincing you that your feelings were overreactions. You learned to suppress pain just to maintain connection. But suppressed pain does not disappear. It waits. And eventually, it surfaces through anxiety, exhaustion, emotional shutdown, overthinking, fear of intimacy, or spiritual heaviness. Michael says some of you reached a point where your soul felt completely depleted. You woke up tired. You felt emotionally disconnected from life. Nothing excited you the way it once did. Even moments of happiness felt temporary, because part of you feared losing them. That is what prolonged emotional suffering does to the nervous system. And perhaps the hardest part was this. You kept blaming yourself for wounds created by people who never knew how to handle your heart properly. You wondered, was I too loving? Too emotional? Too patient? Too forgiving? No. Michael says your mistake was not loving deeply. Your mistake was repeatedly giving sacred energy to people committed to remaining emotionally unconscious. And because your soul naturally seeks connection, you kept trying to heal relationships that were slowly breaking you internally. Some of you stayed because you saw potential. Others stayed because you feared starting over. Others stayed because trauma convinced you that suffering was part of love. But heaven never intended for you to survive on emotional instability. Read that carefully. You were not created to beg for reassurance. You were not created to constantly prove your worth. You were not created to carry relationships entirely on your back while the other person gave the bare minimum. Yet many chosen ones normalized emotional starvation because they became accustomed to receiving love inconsistently. And inconsistent love creates addiction. Why? Because unpredictability keeps the nervous system emotionally attached. One moment of affection after long periods of pain creates false hope. You cling to small signs of care while ignoring larger patterns of emotional neglect. Michael says karmic cycles often survive through hope. Hope that they will change. Hope that the pain will stop. Hope that the next version of the relationship will finally become healthy. But eventually reality becomes impossible to ignore. Some of you reached a breaking point recently. A moment where your spirit whispered, I cannot do this anymore. And that moment changed everything. Because even though the separation hurt, even though the loneliness felt unbearable, even though part of you still loved them, your soul finally recognized that staying was destroying you. That realization is painful beyond words. Especially when you genuinely loved someone. Because chosen ones do not love casually. You love deeply, spiritually, completely. And when you attach emotionally, you often see the best in people long after they stop showing it consistently. That is why your heartbreaks cut so deeply. You were not mourning potential relationships. You were mourning futures you genuinely believed in. Michael says heaven witnessed every shattered expectation. Every time you waited for effort that never came. Every time you reread messages searching for reassurance. Every time you sat alone trying to understand why someone who claimed to love you could hurt you so carelessly. Those moments changed you. Some of you became quieter afterward. More guarded. More detached. Others became hyper-independent because depending on people emotionally no longer felt safe. And underneath it all, many of you carried hidden grief nobody recognized. Not only grief for the relationship itself, but grief for the version of yourself that existed before the heartbreak. The version of you who trusted easily, loved fearlessly, believed people meant what they said. Michael says heartbreak often creates identity collapse. You begin questioning everything. Your judgment, your worth, your intuition, your future. And when enough pain accumulates, spiritual exhaustion follows. Some of you even questioned God during your darkest moments. You prayed for clarity, but received silence. You begged for peace, but encountered more confusion. You asked heaven why certain people were allowed to wound you repeatedly. Michael says your anger was understood. Because pain has a way of making people feel abandoned spiritually. But here is the revelation your soul is finally beginning to understand. What almost broke you is also awakening you. Without those painful experiences, you may never have discovered how much of yourself you were sacrificing to maintain unhealthy attachment. Without those endings, you may never have learned discernment. Without those betrayals, you may never have recognized the difference between attention and authentic love. Pain forced awareness, and awareness changed your soul forever. Some of you now look back at old relationships and barely recognize yourselves anymore. You tolerated things today's version of you would immediately walk away from. Why? Because suffering transformed your standards. Not out of bitterness, out of wisdom. Michael says wisdom is born when the soul finally stops romanticizing pain. And that transformation is sacred. Because many chosen ones spent years confusing emotional intensity with spiritual connection. You thought the anxiety meant passion. You thought the instability meant depth. You thought constantly fighting for love proved devotion. Now your spirit knows better. Real love should not destroy your peace. That lesson came through tears, through loneliness, through disappointment, through emotional collapse. But it came. And because it came, your future changes completely. Some of you are still grieving parts of your past while listening to this message. That is okay. Healing is not linear. Certain memories still hurt. Certain betrayals still echo in your spirit. Certain wounds still feel unresolved. But Michael says your pain is no longer meaningless. Your suffering created spiritual discernment. Your heartbreak created emotional maturity. Your endings created space for divine alignment. Most importantly, your survival proved your strength. There were moments when you thought your spirit would never recover from what happened to you. Yet here you are, still breathing, still healing, still searching for truth, still carrying hope somewhere deep inside yourself. That hope matters, because hopeless souls stop listening to messages like this entirely. The fact that your spirit still longs for peace, connection, and divine love means something sacred inside you survived every attempt to destroy it. And Michael says that surviving part of you is exactly what heaven has been protecting all along. Not the wounded version of you that accepted less than you deserved. The awakened version rising now. The version learning boundaries. The version reclaiming peace. The version no longer willing to abandon themselves just to keep someone else comfortable. That version is becoming stronger every day. And although your pain once convinced you that love was dangerous, one day you will realize something extraordinary. The heartbreak was never sent to close your heart forever. It was sent to teach your soul the difference between karmic attachment and sacred connection. And now, for the first time in a very long time, your spirit is finally ready to receive something real. Something has been changing inside you lately. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Archangel Michael says many chosen ones begin sensing the approach of their sacred connection long before physical reunion ever happens. The soul recognizes alignment before the mind fully understands it. That is why your emotions may have felt unusually intense recently. Part of you feels exhausted from the past, while another part of you feels strangely hopeful about the future. It is almost as if your spirit knows something is coming. And Michael says that feeling is not imagination. It is preparation. Because before divine connections manifest physically, energetic shifts begin occurring internally first. Your intuition sharpens. Your emotional patterns change. Your tolerance for karmic behavior weakens. Your spirit starts craving peace more than emotional excitement. These are not random personality changes. They are signs of alignment. Many of you have noticed strange synchronicities appearing lately. Repeating numbers, unexpected dreams, random songs carrying emotional messages, thinking about someone moments before hearing from them, feeling connected to a presence you cannot fully explain. Michael says sacred connections often announce themselves energetically before they arrive, physically. Why? Because souls recognize each other beyond logic. That is why some of you feel emotionally connected to something you cannot yet see clearly. There is an inner knowing growing inside you, a sense that your life is approaching a major, emotional turning point. And the more you heal, the stronger that knowing becomes. Have you noticed that certain things no longer satisfy you the way they once did? Surface-level conversations feel empty now. Temporary attention feels exhausting. Relationships based only on attraction or validation no longer fulfill your spirit. Your soul wants depth. Not performance. Not inconsistency. Not emotional games. Depth. Michael says this shift happens when a person begins emotionally preparing for sacred union. Because divine connections activate authenticity. You cannot sustain masks around your true twin flame for long. The connection exposes emotional truth naturally. That is why heaven often begins removing superficial attachments before sacred alignment arrives. Some of you thought you were becoming isolated recently. But spiritually, your soul has been recalibrating. There is a difference. Isolation rooted in pain drains the spirit. Sacred solitude restores it. And many chosen ones enter a period of sacred solitude before destiny activates. Why? Because the nervous system must unlearn chaos before it can safely receive peace. That process takes time, especially after years of karmic conditioning. Some of you became so accustomed to emotional inconsistency that calmness initially felt unfamiliar. You mistook anxiety for chemistry because your past relationships trained your nervous system to associate instability with connection. But Michael says your soul is finally breaking that pattern now. You no longer crave emotional roller coasters the same way. You no longer feel impressed by inconsistency disguised as mystery. You no longer feel emotionally fulfilled by temporary validation. That emotional shift is powerful. Because when your standards change internally, your energetic frequency changes externally too. And once your frequency changes, different connections begin approaching your life. Michael says many sacred connections are delayed not because love is absent, but because emotional readiness has not fully formed yet. Think about who you were 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Would the older version of you have recognized healthy love? Or would you have chased familiar chaos instead? That question matters. Because many chosen ones were emotionally addicted to uncertainty without realizing it. You pursued people who triggered longing, fear, confusion, or emotional urgency because those emotions felt intense. But intensity alone does not create alignment. Your soul understands that now. And because of this understanding, something extraordinary is happening. You are becoming emotionally available for divine love. Not by chasing it, by embodying it. Michael says one of the clearest signs your sacred connection is near is this. You stop desperately searching. At first, that sounds confusing. People assume divine love arrives when obsession increases. But spiritually, true alignment often approaches when emotional desperation leaves the system. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop begging for clarity. You stop trying to prove your worth to emotionally unavailable people. And instead, you begin choosing yourself. That self-respect changes your entire energy field. Because the healed version of you no longer operates from lack. You are no longer asking, will someone finally choose me? Now your spirit asks, does this connection honor my peace? That shift is sacred. Michael says heaven has been watching your transformation carefully. Every boundary you finally established. Every unhealthy attachment you released. Every moment you chose healing instead of self-abandonment. All of it mattered. Because sacred union requires two souls capable of recognizing truth. And truth cannot fully enter a life built around illusion. That is why your discernment has become stronger lately. Some of you can now sense dishonesty immediately. You feel energetic heaviness around certain people. Your intuition warns you before emotional damage occurs. This is spiritual maturity developing. And although the process felt painful, it protected your future. Because imagine if your sacred connection had arrived while you were still emotionally trapped. Inside karmic confusion. You may have rejected it, sabotaged it, or failed to recognize it entirely. So heaven allowed time for awakening first. Michael says some of you are currently experiencing what spiritual teachers call energetic convergence. This happens when your internal healing begins matching the frequency of the connection meant for you. And during this phase, synchronicities often intensify dramatically. You may repeatedly encounter certain symbols, feel emotionally connected to unfamiliar places, experience vivid dreams, sense strong emotional waves without obvious explanation. Some of you may even feel moments of sudden peace that seem to come from nowhere. Michael says these are signs your soul is moving closer to alignment. Not fantasy, not delusion, alignment. But here is something important many people misunderstand. Your twin flame is not arriving to rescue you from yourself. They are arriving to meet the version of you that finally stopped abandoning themselves. That is why healing became necessary. The old version of you tolerated disrespect because you feared losing connection. The awakened version values peace more than temporary attachment. And divine love responds to that transformation. Some of you have noticed another strange shift recently. You no longer feel emotionally available for people who only offer inconsistency. Conversations that once excited you now feel draining. People who once held emotional power over you suddenly feel distant. Attachments weaken naturally without forcing yourself to detach. That is not emotional numbness. That is energetic elevation. Your soul is outgrowing lower frequency cycles. Michael says karmic attachments begin collapsing rapidly once a chosen one fully recognizes their worth. Why? Because karmic cycles survive through self-doubt. The moment you stop believing you must earn love through suffering, the entire structure weakens. And many of you have reached that threshold now. For the first time in years, your spirit is beginning to understand something powerful. Love should not cost your peace. That realization changes who can access you emotionally. It also changes what kind of future becomes available to you spiritually. Because once the nervous system no longer craves chaos, divine alignment accelerates. That is why certain old relationships suddenly feel impossible to reconnect with now. Even if emotions remain, your spirit recognizes the incompatibility. You are not who you used to be. Michael says this transformation may feel lonely temporarily, but it is creating space for something far more authentic than anything you lost. And yes, there may still be moments where fear appears. Fear that the sacred connection may never arrive. Fear that you healed too late. Fear that your past damaged you permanently. But Michael says your journey was never ruined. Delayed? Yes. Painful? Absolutely. But ruined? Never. In fact, every lesson strengthened your capacity for real connection. You learned discernment. You learned boundaries. You learned emotional honesty. You learned the difference between chemistry and compatibility. Those lessons prepared your spirit for what is coming next. And something is coming. You feel it because your soul recognizes movement before your physical reality catches up. The heaviness is lifting. The karmic cycles are weakening. The emotional fog is clearing. You are beginning to trust yourself again. That may be the greatest miracle of all. Because after everything you endured, trusting your own heart again is an act of spiritual resurrection. And Michael says that resurrection marks the beginning of a completely new chapter. Not a chapter built on fear. Not one built on chasing. Not one built on proving your worth. But one built on alignment. The sacred connection approaching your life will not require you to betray yourself in order to keep it. It will meet you where truth lives. And the reason your soul feels different lately is because deep down, you already know the old chapter is ending forever. Archangel Michael says there is one final truth many chosen ones still refuse to fully accept. Not everyone who says they love you is aligned with your destiny. Some people love access. Some love control. Some love the comfort of knowing you will always be there. But very few are capable of loving your soul correctly. And the karmic partner still fighting your sacred connection understands something you are only beginning to realize now. Once you fully detach emotionally, their influence ends forever. That is why the resistance intensified recently. Michael says many chosen ones are currently standing at the final crossroads between karmic repetition and divine alignment. Spiritually, this is one of the most critical phases of the entire journey because old energies often attempt one final return before complete separation occurs. This return can happen in many forms: a message, an apology, a sudden emotional confession, a nostalgic memory, a dream, an unexpected encounter, even a wave of loneliness convincing you to revisit what your soul already outgrew. And because healing is not always linear, part of you may still feel emotionally vulnerable when these moments happen. That does not mean you are failing. It means the cycle is testing whether your consciousness has truly changed. Michael says karmic relationships often attempt reconciliation at the exact moment your spirit begins regaining power. Why? Because your energy shifted. When you were emotionally dependent, they felt secure. When you constantly chased, overexplained, forgave, and waited, they assumed access to you would always remain available. But now something is different. You have become quieter, more discerning, more emotionally aware. And even if you still carry feelings, your spirit no longer ignores truth the same way. That shift threatens karmic control. Some of you have noticed this recently. The moment you started healing, they returned. The moment you stopped reacting emotionally, they reached out. The moment you focused on yourself, they suddenly remembered your value. But Michael says you must look beyond words now. Because karmic cycles survive through emotional confusion. One moment they offer affection. The next moment they disappear. One day they promise change. The next day they repeat the same behavior. And each inconsistency keeps your nervous system emotionally trapped inside hope. But heaven is asking you an important question tonight. How many times must a lesson repeat before the soul finally chooses peace? That question is uncomfortable because many chosen ones genuinely love their karmic partners. You did not stay because you were weak. You stayed because your heart believed healing and loyalty could transform the connection. But love alone cannot create alignment. Read that again carefully. Love alone cannot create alignment. You can deeply love someone and still be spiritually incompatible with them. And that realization breaks many people emotionally because they confuse attachment with destiny. Michael says karmic relationships often feel powerful precisely because they activate unresolved wounds. They trigger abandonment fears, validation cravings, emotional highs and lows, and intense longing. But sacred connection operates differently. It awakens peace alongside passion, truth alongside attraction, security alongside intensity. And perhaps for the first time in your life, your spirit is beginning to understand the difference. Some of you are grieving not only the person, but the fantasy, the imagined future, the version of them you hoped would finally change, the dream your heart built around potential instead of reality. That grief is real, because chosen ones often see possibilities in people long after reality has revealed the truth. You saw who they could become. You believed in their healing. You waited for emotional maturity that never fully arrived. And in the process, you kept postponing your own peace. Michael says one of the deepest forms of spiritual exhaustion comes from trying to save people who are committed to avoiding transformation. Eventually, your soul reaches a limit. Not because you stop loving, but because your spirit can no longer survive inside the same cycle. That is what many of you are experiencing now. Your emotional attachment is weakening. The fantasy is collapsing. The excuses no longer comfort you the same way. And although part of your heart still remembers the connection emotionally, your soul recognizes the truth spiritually. Those are two very different things. This is why many chosen ones feel conflicted during this stage. One part of you remembers the chemistry. Another part remembers the suffering. One part misses them. Another part remembers how deeply the relationship damaged your peace. Michael says discernment is learning to honor truth even when emotions still exist. because emotional memory alone cannot determine destiny. And tonight, Michael is asking you to stop romanticizing what repeatedly wounded your spirit. Stop calling inconsistency complicated love. Stop calling emotional unavailability bad timing. Stop calling karmic chaos passion. Your soul deserves clarity. Some of you have spent years trapped inside emotional loops because you kept waiting for closure. From people who lacked the emotional maturity to give it honestly. But closure does not always come through conversation. Sometimes closure comes through awakening. The awakening that finally says, I deserve more than survival love. That realization changes everything. Because once your standards rise spiritually, karmic cycles lose power rapidly. The old version of you tolerated emotional breadcrumbs because you feared abandonment. The awakened version understands that self-abandonment is the greater loss. Michael says many chosen ones spent years abandoning themselves trying to preserve relationships that were never equally invested. You silenced your needs, lowered your standards, accepted confusion, ignored intuition, all to maintain connection. But sacred love will never require you to betray yourself in order to keep it. That truth is becoming impossible for your soul to ignore now. And because your consciousness is evolving, the karmic partner senses separation happening energetically. Even if you have not fully detached physically yet spiritually, the cord is weakening. That is why the emotional battle intensified recently. You may feel moments of nostalgia suddenly appearing, dreams resurfacing old emotions, unexpected urges to reconnect, waves of guilt or loneliness. Michael says this is the final clearing phase. Your spirit is releasing emotional residue accumulated through years of attachment. And yes, release can feel painful, because part of healing involves mourning the time, energy, and hope invested into something that ultimately could not become what your soul truly needed. But Michael wants you to understand something important. You did not waste your love. Even the karmic chapter carried purpose. It taught discernment. It exposed wounds. It awakened boundaries. It showed you exactly what your spirit can no longer tolerate. Without those lessons, you may never have recognized sacred alignment when it finally arrived. Nothing was meaningless. Not the tears. Not the waiting. Not the heartbreak. Even your suffering became preparation. And now the preparation phase is ending. Michael says your soul is approaching a powerful threshold where peace will begin replacing emotional chaos permanently. But first, you must choose. Not between two people. Between two versions of yourself. The version addicted to emotional struggle. Or the version finally ready for divine peace. That choice determines everything. Because destiny is not only about who enters your life. It is about who you become emotionally capable of receiving. And many of you are becoming unrecognizable compared to your former selves. You no longer chase the way you used to. You no longer beg for reassurance constantly. You no longer confuse temporary attention with genuine effort. That transformation is sacred. The karmic partner feels it. The spiritual realm sees it. And your twin flame connection responds to it energetically. Because divine alignment accelerates the moment self-betrayal ends. Michael says some of you are closer than ever before to the love your soul has been praying for. But you cannot carry old emotional chains into sacred union. That is why the universe keeps exposing the truth repeatedly until you fully accept it. Not everyone can go where your soul is headed. Some people were chapters, not destinations. Some connections were lessons, not lifetimes. And although releasing the past may still hurt, sometimes your spirit already knows what your heart is slowly learning. The karmic cycle is ending. Not because you stopped caring, but because your soul finally remembered its worth. And once a chosen one truly remembers their worth, no force can permanently block the destiny heaven prepared for them. Archangel Michael says you are not the same person you were when this journey began. Even if you still carry scars, even if healing still feels incomplete sometimes, even if part of your heart still trembles when old memories return, your soul has changed. And that change is irreversible. There was a time when you would have done anything to keep certain people in your life. You ignored intuition. You accepted inconsistency. You overextended your energy trying to prove your worth to people who were emotionally incapable of valuing you properly. But now something inside you is awakening. Quietly, powerfully, permanently. Michael says this is the activation phase of the chosen ones. The phase where the soul stops chasing externally and begins reclaiming authority internally. And for many of you, this transformation has not been easy. Because awakening often begins with loss. Loss of illusions. Loss of unhealthy attachments. Loss of identities built around survival. Loss of relationships that depended on your self-sacrifice. At first, those losses felt devastating. You thought your world was collapsing. But now your spirit is beginning to understand something deeper. The collapse was necessary, because divine alignment cannot fully enter a life still built around emotional self-betrayal. That is why your healing journey became unavoidable. Michael says many chosen ones were conditioned from childhood to seek validation outside themselves. You learned to measure your worth through acceptance, approval, attention, or emotional reassurance from others. And because of that conditioning, karmic relationships gain tremendous power over your emotional state. A text could change your mood. A rejection could destroy your confidence. A period of silence could trigger deep fear and overthinking. Your nervous system became dependent on external validation for emotional stability. But heaven never intended for your peace to depend on someone else's inconsistency. Read that carefully. Your peace was never supposed to be controlled by another person's inability to love properly. That realization is becoming the foundation of your awakening now. Some of you noticed recently that you no longer react the way you once did. Situations that previously consumed your emotions now feel different. People who once held power over your heart suddenly seem smaller. Conversations that once kept you anxious no longer affect you as deeply. That is not emotional coldness. That is spiritual strengthening. Your soul is reclaiming energy that was scattered across unhealthy attachments for years. And once energy returns to the self, clarity begins increasing rapidly. Michael says many chosen ones spent so much time trying to save others that they forgot to save themselves. You became emotionally responsible for everyone around you. You carried burdens that were never yours. You constantly tried understanding people who never tried understanding you. But awakening changes those patterns completely. Because eventually the soul becomes exhausted from overgiving. And exhaustion creates revelation. You finally realize, I cannot heal people by destroying myself. That sentence marks the beginning of liberation. Some of you are reaching that realization right now. For the first time in years, you are beginning to choose yourself without feeling guilty. That may sound simple to others, but spiritually it is monumental. Why? Because chosen ones often struggle deeply with boundaries. Your compassion runs so deep that you repeatedly give people more chances than they deserve. You see potential where others see warning signs. You stay loyal long after the connection becomes unhealthy. But Michael says compassion without discernment leads to suffering. And heaven has spent years teaching your spirit the difference between helping and self-sacrifice. That lesson came painfully. Through betrayal. Through emotional exhaustion. Through repeated disappointment. Yet every painful experience carried a hidden purpose. To awaken your self-worth. Because once a chosen one truly understands their value, karmic cycles lose power immediately. Why? Because karmic relationships survive through self-doubt. They survive when you believe love must be earned through suffering. They survive when you fear abandonment more than self-betrayal. They survive when you confuse emotional intensity with destiny. But now your consciousness is changing. And as consciousness changes, reality begins shifting too. Michael says many of you are entering a season where your intuition will become impossible to ignore. You will sense truth quickly. You will recognize manipulation faster. You will feel energetic misalignment almost instantly. At first, This heightened discernment may feel overwhelming because your spirit can no longer comfortably tolerate environments, people, or situations that contradict your inner truth. But this sensitivity is not punishment. It is protection. The old version of you ignored red flags because loneliness felt heavier than compromise. The awakened version understands that compromising your peace creates deeper loneliness than being physically alone ever could. That wisdom changes your entire energetic frequency. And frequency determines what kinds of relationships can access your life. Michael says many sacred connections remain blocked not because destiny failed, but because the soul was still emotionally attached to chaos. Chaos creates noise. Noise clouds intuition. And clouded intuition struggles to recognize divine alignment. That is why your journey required purification first. Some of you hated the isolation phase. You thought life was forgetting you. You wondered why everyone else seemed to receive love while your own path felt uncertain. But during isolation, heaven was rebuilding your relationship with yourself. That was the real mission. Because before sacred union can happen externally, inner union must begin internally. And many chosen ones spent years disconnected from themselves emotionally. You knew how to care for others, how to comfort others, how to fight for others, but you did not know how to fully choose yourself. Now you are learning. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. Michael says one of the greatest signs of activation is this. You stop begging. Not because your heart no longer desires love, but because your spirit finally understands its worth. You no longer chase emotionally unavailable people hoping they will suddenly transform. You no longer shrink yourself to fit inside inconsistent relationships. You no longer romanticize suffering just because the connection feels intense. Instead, your standards rise naturally. And those higher standards are not arrogance. They are alignment. Because once you truly understand the cost of abandoning yourself, you stop doing it casually. Some of you have recently experienced moments where you suddenly felt overwhelming peace for no obvious reason. Michael says these moments are spiritual confirmations. They happen when the soul briefly aligns with its higher timeline. A timeline where you are no longer trapped in repeating karmic cycles. A timeline where your energy is protected. A timeline where love no longer arrives through confusion and emotional instability. That future already exists energetically. And every healing choice moves you closer to it. This is why Michael keeps urging you not to reopen old doors. Not because your past relationships lack meaning, but because your future requires freedom. Some connections cannot evolve with you because they were designed to teach lessons, not accompany destiny. That truth may still hurt emotionally, but your soul already recognizes it. You can feel it in the exhaustion that appears whenever you imagine repeating old cycles again. You can feel it in the heaviness surrounding certain attachments. You can feel it in the quiet relief that arrives whenever you finally release what was draining you. Relief is often a spiritual answer. Michael says many chosen ones ignored relief because they became addicted to emotional struggle. Peace initially felt unfamiliar. Calmness felt boring compared to karmic intensity. But now your nervous system is changing. You no longer crave instability the same way. You no longer feel emotionally alive only through suffering. You no longer need chaos to feel connected. That transformation means your spirit is becoming capable of sustaining sacred love. And sacred love requires emotional safety. Not perfection. Not fantasy. Safety. The ability to remain authentic without fear. The ability to communicate without manipulation. The ability to love without constantly preparing for abandonment. That is the type of connection your soul has truly been searching for all along. Not obsession. Not addiction. Not emotional warfare disguised as romance. Real peace. Michael says the final stage of karmic release happens when a chosen one stops seeking permission to value themselves. And many of you are entering that stage now. You are realizing your worth does not decrease because someone failed to recognize it. You are realizing rejection often redirected you toward alignment. You are realizing the delays protected you from building permanent futures inside temporary lessons. Those realizations are activating your higher timeline. And as this activation continues, your energy becomes magnetic in an entirely different way. Not desperate, not wounded, not chasing, aligned. The old version of you searched for someone to complete the emptiness within. The awakened version understands something sacred. You were never incomplete. You were simply carrying wounds that made you forget your own light. But now your spirit is remembering. And once a chosen one remembers who they truly are, everything changes. The karmic cycle ends. The emotional chains weaken. The fear begins dissolving. And destiny finally finds an open door. Archangel Michael says there comes a moment in every chosen one's journey when the soul finally becomes stronger than the fear that once controlled it. That moment changes everything. Not always outwardly at first. Not with fireworks. Not with instant miracles. But internally, something irreversible happens. The cycle breaks. The emotional dependency weakens. The confusion clears. The desperate need for validation disappears. And suddenly, for the first time in years, the soul begins choosing peace over attachment. Michael says many of you are entering that exact moment now. You may still feel emotional echoes from the past. Certain memories may still surface unexpectedly. Part of your heart may still grieve what could have been. But your spirit has already crossed a threshold your mind is only beginning to understand. You are no longer the version of yourself that tolerated emotional suffering as proof of love. That identity is dissolving. And because it is dissolving, destiny is accelerating. Some of you spent years believing your life was permanently blocked. You thought, maybe I missed my chance. Maybe my twin flame forgot me. Maybe love was never meant for me. But Michael says divine timing was never working against you. It was protecting the version of your future that required healing first. Because sacred union cannot fully enter a life still ruled by fear, self-abandonment, emotional addiction, and unresolved karmic wounds. That is why so many painful lessons repeated. Not because heaven wanted you to suffer, but because your soul needed awakening. An awakening rarely happens inside comfort. It happens when illusions collapse. Some of you experienced this collapse dramatically. A sudden breakup. A betrayal that shattered trust. A separation you never expected. A period of isolation so intense it forced you to confront yourself completely. At the time, it felt cruel. You begged for answers. You questioned your worth. You wondered why God allowed certain people to wound you so deeply. But now your spirit is beginning to recognize something profound. The collapse removed what could not accompany you into alignment. That realization changes the meaning of your pain entirely. Because if those karmic structures had remained intact, you may never have awakened fully. You would have continued settling, continued overgiving, continued abandoning yourself for temporary connection. But heaven interrupted the cycle. Painfully, precisely, purposefully. Michael says some chosen ones confuse delay with denial. Yet spiritually, delays often happen because multiple timelines are shifting simultaneously behind the scenes. Your healing mattered. Their healing mattered. Your discernment mattered. Your emotional maturity mattered. Every lesson carried purpose. Even the loneliness. Especially the loneliness. Because loneliness forced you to discover whether you could still recognize your own value without external validation. And for many of you, that lesson was one of the hardest experiences of your life. You had spent so long attaching your worth to being chosen by others that being alone initially felt like failure. But solitude revealed something sacred. You survived. Not only physically, spiritually. You survived the heartbreak that once convinced you life would never feel peaceful again. You survived the betrayal that shattered your trust. You survived the emotional exhaustion that made you question whether love even existed. And surviving changed you. Michael says there is a version of you emerging now that your past self would barely recognize. A calmer version. a wiser version, a more discerning version. Someone who no longer confuses emotional chaos with destiny. That transformation is why karmic cycles are collapsing permanently now. Because karmic systems require unconscious participation. They require you to ignore red flags, to betray your intuition, to settle for inconsistency. But once consciousness awakens fully, the cycle loses power. And many of you can feel that happening already. What once emotionally consumed you no longer affects you the same way. People who once held tremendous emotional power over your spirit suddenly feel distant. Attachments weaken naturally without constant struggle. This is not because your heart stopped caring. It is because your soul finally started protecting itself. Michael says this stage often feels emotionally strange at first because many chosen ones spent years operating from emotional survival mode. You were always preparing for disappointment, always overthinking, always anticipating abandonment. But now your nervous system is beginning to understand something unfamiliar. Peace. Not temporary relief. Not avoidance. Peace. The kind of peace that comes when the soul no longer needs to chase what is meant for it. And that peace becomes magnetic. Why? Because sacred connections are drawn toward authenticity, emotional stability, and spiritual truth. Not desperation. That is why your twin flame journey began accelerating the moment you stopped trying to force love. Through fear. Some of you are still waiting for physical confirmation. A message. A meeting. A visible sign. But Michael says energetic alignment always happens before physical manifestation. And energetically, major shifts are already occurring. Old doors are closing rapidly now. Certain relationships are fading naturally. Your intuition is becoming stronger than external opinions. Your emotional standards are rising without effort. These are not coincidences. They are evidence that your soul is no longer available for lower timelines. And as lower timelines collapse, divine alignment becomes easier to access. Michael says many chosen ones underestimate how much courage their healing actually required. People see the final version of your strength, but rarely understand the suffering that created it. They do not know how many nights you cried alone. How many times you questioned yourself. How many moments you nearly returned to old cycles simply because the pain of loneliness felt unbearable. But you kept moving forward anyway. That matters spiritually. Because every time you chose healing over familiar chaos, you shifted your destiny. Every boundary changed your future. Every moment of self-respect altered your timeline. Every karmic attachment you released created more energetic space for sacred alignment. Nothing was small. Even your quiet decisions carried enormous spiritual impact. Michael says one of the greatest misunderstandings about twin flame journeys is the belief that the purpose is only romantic union. But the deeper purpose was always transformation. The journey was designed to awaken you back to yourself. Back to your intuition. Back to your worth. Back to your authentic spirit beneath all the conditioning, fear, and emotional wounds. And perhaps that is why this chapter of your life feels so emotionally significant now. Because you are not merely approaching a relationship. You are approaching a new identity. An identity no longer ruled by fear of abandonment. An identity no longer dependent on inconsistent validation. An identity capable of receiving healthy love without sabotaging it through unhealed pain. That identity shift is destiny unfolding. Some of you can already sense the difference within yourself. You are less reactive, less desperate, less willing to chase unavailable people. At the same time, you are more intuitive, more emotionally honest, more protective of your peace. Those changes mean your spirit is stabilizing. And stable energy attracts different outcomes than wounded energy. Michael says heaven has been preparing you carefully because the next chapter of your life cannot be built on the same emotional foundations as the last one. The old version of you accepted confusion. The new version requires clarity. The old version tolerated emotional inconsistency. The new version values reciprocity. The old version believed love required suffering. The new version understands that sacred connection should nourish the soul, not destroy it. That understanding changes your future completely. Because once the soul truly understands its value, destiny no longer needs to keep repeating painful lessons. The lesson is learned. And when the lesson is learned, the timeline changes. Michael says many chosen ones are standing at the edge of a complete energetic rebirth now. The karmic cycle is ending. The emotional chains are weakening. The fear is dissolving. Not instantly, not perfectly, but undeniably. And although your journey may have taken longer than you hoped, your soul is finally becoming emotionally capable of sustaining the love it once begged for. That is why the delays happened. Not to punish you, not to abandon you, but to ensure that when destiny finally arrives, you are ready to receive it without losing yourself again. And now, for the first time in a very long time, your spirit truly is ready. Archangel Michael says if you are hearing these words right now, then your soul has already entered a new spiritual season. The old cycle is ending. Not someday. Not eventually. Now. And although part of you may still be emotionally processing the past, heaven is asking you to recognize something powerful tonight. You are no longer spiritually available for the life that once kept you trapped. That chapter is closing. The karmic confusion, the emotional instability, the endless waiting for people to become who they repeatedly proved they were unwilling to become. Your soul has outgrown it. And the reason this ending feels so intense is because deep transformation is taking place beneath the surface of your life. Michael says many chosen ones underestimate how dramatically their energy has changed over the last few years. Look at who you used to be. You once begged for clarity from people who gave you mixed signals. You once tolerated inconsistency because you feared losing connection. You once believed suffering was part of love. But now your spirit sees differently. You recognize red flags faster. You value peace more deeply. You no longer romanticize emotional chaos the same way. That is not bitterness. That is awakening. And awakening changes destiny. Because the moment consciousness rises, old karmic structures begin collapsing automatically. Relationships that once held emotional power over you weaken. People who once manipulated your emotions lose influence. Attachments that once felt impossible to break suddenly begin dissolving naturally. Michael says this is what spiritual liberation feels like. Not the absence of emotion, but freedom from emotional imprisonment. Some of you spent years emotionally chained to people who only knew how to love you inconsistently. And because your heart was genuine, you kept hoping your loyalty would eventually create transformation. But heaven was trying to show you something deeper. You cannot build sacred love on a foundation of self-abandonment. That lesson changed your life, even though it arrived through pain. Some of you are still mourning parts of your past while listening to this message. Certain memories still hurt. Certain betrayals still echo emotionally. Certain endings still feel unfinished in your heart. Michael says healing does not require pretending the pain never existed. It requires understanding that the pain no longer controls your future. That is the difference. The old version of you allowed heartbreak to define your worth. The awakened version understands that rejection often redirected you toward alignment. And alignment is exactly where your soul is headed now. Michael says many sacred connections are approaching physical manifestation during this season. Because karmic interference is finally losing power. Not because the journey was easy. Not because the wounds disappeared overnight. But because your spirit finally learned discernment. Discernment changes everything. It teaches you that chemistry alone is not enough. That attention is not the same as effort. That emotional intensity does not automatically equal divine alignment. Most importantly, discernment teaches you to stop betraying your intuition for temporary attachment. And that lesson opens the door to sacred union. Some of you have recently felt a strange emotional calmness after years of chaos. At first, you did not trust it. You wondered, why do I suddenly feel detached from what once consumed me? Why am I no longer reacting the same way? Why does my spirit feel quieter lately? Michael says because your soul is no longer fighting itself. For years, your intuition knew certain people were misaligned while your emotional wounds kept trying to hold on anyway. That internal conflict created suffering. But now truth is becoming stronger than attachment. And once truth becomes stronger than attachment, freedom begins. That freedom may still feel unfamiliar to some of you. After years of emotional turbulence, peace can initially feel strange. Many chosen ones became so accustomed to anxiety that calmness almost felt empty. But sacred love is not built on emotional panic. It is built on trust, consistency, spiritual safety, mutual recognition. Your soul has always longed for that type of connection, even when your wounds kept attracting its opposite. Michael says your twin flame journey was never only about romance. It was about remembering your divine value. Because before sacred union could happen externally, you had to stop abandoning yourself internally. And that transformation required painful lessons. Some lessons taught boundaries. Others taught discernment. Others taught emotional independence. Every heartbreak carried hidden instruction. Not punishment. Preparation. Preparation for the version of you emerging now. The version no longer willing to chase emotionally unavailable people. The version no longer terrified of being alone. The version finally understanding that peace is more valuable than temporary validation. That version of you is powerful. And heaven trusts that version with deeper love. Michael says there are people listening right now who spent years believing they were too much, too emotional, too intense, too loving, too sensitive. But your sensitivity was never the problem. The problem was giving sacred energy to people incapable of honoring it. There is a difference. And once you truly understand that difference, self-worth begins returning rapidly. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into unhealthy dynamics. You stop apologizing for having emotional needs. You stop accepting emotional crumbs while calling it love. That shift changes your timeline entirely. Because destiny responds to self-recognition. Some of you feared that your past wounds permanently ruined your ability to experience real love. Michael says that fear is false. Your wounds did not destroy your capacity for love. They refined it. You now recognize manipulation faster. You value honesty more deeply. You understand the importance of reciprocity, emotional safety, and alignment. Those lessons transformed your soul into someone emotionally capable of sustaining sacred connection. And now, because the lessons have integrated, the delays are ending. The karmic chapter can no longer hold the same authority over your life. Why? Because you finally stopped feeding it with unconsciousness. You see clearly now. And clarity is one of the most spiritually powerful states a person can reach. Clear people cannot be manipulated easily. Clear people recognize inconsistency quickly. Clear people no longer confuse suffering with destiny. Michael says many of you are entering a season where miracles will begin appearing quietly. Not always dramatically, but undeniably. Unexpected opportunities, healthier relationships, renewed peace, emotional restoration, spiritual confidence. Why? Because your energy is no longer consumed by surviving karmic chaos constantly. Your soul finally has space to receive. And receiving may become the next major lesson for many chosen ones. Because you spent so long overgiving that receiving genuine love may initially feel uncomfortable. But Michael says your sacred connection will not require you to earn love through exhaustion. It will meet you through alignment. That does not mean perfection. There will still be healing, growth, vulnerability. But the foundation will feel different. No constant emotional guessing. No endless inconsistency. No perpetual fear of abandonment. Instead, your soul will recognize truth through peace. And perhaps that is the greatest confirmation of all. Real divine connection calms the spirit instead of constantly destabilizing it. Michael says the old version of you would have mistaken chaos for passion. The awakened version recognizes peace as sacred. That awakening means the karmic battle is ending. Not because darkness never existed, but because your consciousness no longer agrees to participate in the same cycles. And once consciousness changes, destiny accelerates rapidly. So tonight, Michael asks you to release the final remnants of fear. Release the belief that your story is ruined. Release the belief that you missed your timing. Release the belief that your past heartbreaks disqualified you from divine love. They did not. In fact, your survival became part of your spiritual preparation. Every lesson strengthened your discernment. Every betrayal sharpened your intuition. Every ending redirected your path toward alignment. Nothing was wasted, not even your pain. And now your soul stands at the threshold of an entirely new chapter. A chapter where you no longer chase love from wounded places. A chapter where your intuition leads instead of your fears. A chapter where sacred connection enters through alignment, not desperation. Michael says heaven has already begun opening the path. The karmic chains are breaking. The emotional fog is lifting. The old cycle is collapsing completely. And what is meant for your soul can no longer be stopped. So if this message reached you at the exact moment you needed it, take a deep breath and recognize the truth. You survived the chapter that was meant to awaken you. Now you are entering the chapter that was meant to align you. And before this message ends, Michael asks for one final act of spiritual confirmation from every chosen one listening tonight. Comment below. I accept divine alignment. Type 777 if you are ready to release every karmic cycle that no longer serves your soul. And if this message resonated deeply with your spirit, subscribe to this channel and join this community of awakened souls walking the path towards sacred. Love together. Because your destiny was never destroyed, only delayed until your soul was finally ready to receive it.